Welcome to Rad Chat. I'm your host, Brandilynn, and today I'm super excited because my special guest is Juan Cruz, who is an educator, and I originally know him from my hometown. So thank you so much for coming, or Zoom
I'm
coming.
here. Honored to be here. Nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been so long, which is so cool to like catch up and get to know you in out of school way.
Absolutely.
So just for everyone to know, I used to know you as Mr. Cruz because in middle school I had Mr. Schaefer as a social studies teacher, and you were the other, like you got one or the other social studies teacher, but
hmm
you were the coach of the wrestling team, and for some reason, like I was always so in, not for like everyone used to think like girls would only be the stat girl for the boys, and I just was so into the sport because I felt like it was like an actual like wow, like you have to be like strong and hardworking to be a wrestler. And so I wanted to be the stat girl, and you allowed me to be the central middle school stat girl.
Do you remember the story behind that or no?
I feel like I feel like Sean Paz really like was like, oh, we need a stat girl, like come be this. I want to say Sean Paz referred like told me about it first. So shout out to Sean.
So yeah, there was Sean, and he was on the team, and then there were a few other girls that had asked to be the stat girls. And you spoke to Mr. Schaefer about wanting to be the stat girl, and he recommended that you write a letter explaining why you would be the best choice for
Oh,
stat girl.
I did have to write a letter. You're
Yeah,
right.
you explained you were the only one submitted a letter, and you explained, I want to be a stat person because I want to learn about the sport. I like the sport. I'm not there to flirt or gawk at the guys. I want to learn about it. And then I thought it was cool that you ended up sticking with it throughout high school.
Yeah.
I thought that was really mature of a seventh grader to come down, hand me a letter stating her reasons as to why they wanted to get involved with the sport. And yeah, you were the one selected. So you did a great
Yeah,
job.
and it was thank
You
you.
were a
And
quick learner.
it was so fun, I feel like, because you're right. I actually like didn't remember I wrote a letter until you just said it, but I think like, oh, how funny. Like I really was super interested in the sport. And now as an adult, I'm so into UFC, which I'm like, oh, my roots
Mhm.
being a high school stat girl and middle school stat girl really come in handy because when there's wrestling in UFC, I'm like, oh, I know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Now,
I
I don't
was,
know, I'm sure you know this, that there's a Par Hills kid that's part of
yes,
Bellator.
Dillon Danis. I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what your if you I'm sure you have a story because when we versed because okay, so people that don't know, we were Parsippany High School and our rival school was Parsippany Hills High School. And so Dillon Danis went to Parsippany Hills, but you would like verse your rival high school, and then when you go to districts and counties and all that, you like kind of are like sit together and you're kind of friendly because like you're trying to beat the other like districts and counties and stuff. And so I remember like in high school he was like really good, and when we would go to like districts and counties he would win, and I would have to like do the brackets, and like they would sit right next to us, and I was like, oh, like that guy, like he's gonna go to states, like he's gonna be like the one for our town. And then you grow up, you kind of like after high school, like everyone goes their own way and their own path. And I remember, I'll never forget it. It was the second Diaz and McGregor fight. And I like, and I'm like, who's that? I'm like, wait a minute, like the guy on his on McGregor's ring, like, why does he look so familiar to me? And I'm like, holy shit, that's Dillon Danis. And I'm with a bunch of
Mhm.
people, and I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my god, that kid went to my town, like he's from my town. And I'm like, and no one believed me. I'm like, no, I was a stat, and I had to go through the whole story, and I could not believe that like this kid from Parsippany is in McGregor's corner.
Mhm.
Yeah, crazy story. So now I think that made me more of a McGregor fan. I don't know what your take of it is because you were like a coach and stuff, so you probably have some stories.
So I don't really know Dylan that well. The only I guess the times that we kind of cross paths were here's my son. He just wants to say hi. Okay. All right.
Hey.
Um, he was a student at Parsippany Hills High School, and his coach I worked with a little bit, Mr. Lodato, Jason Lodato. So there were a few times they were like talking in the hallways, and if he had a big match, I would just congratulate him on his victory, things like that. But I didn't get an opportunity to get to know him as well as Mr. Lodato or the AD there, Mr. Ricker, Todd Ricker. But he was always very nice, you know, would say thank you, soft-spoken guy. I remember Lodato telling me that he was actually an elite, I want to say I can't remember if it's jiu-jitsu or taekwondo.
I want to say it's jiu-jitsu.
But he's like a world-class grappler, and like he's won numerous tournaments. So he is legit in every sense of the word. And I would never ever like sleep on him if you're out in the street, because he'd put you to sleep real fast.
Yeah. How funny. Isn't it kind of funny to know like someone from our town? I don't know. I feel like now that I moved out of Parsippany, I have more pride like Parsippany. I like
you moved out and we moved in, you know, we moved to Parsippany.
Yeah, that's true.
Oops, Dominic, please don't do that.
So I always think I just think that was so funny because I'm like, oh my God, like I always think of you when it comes to wrestling because you were the person that got me into like gave me a chance in that world. So I'm like, oh my God, I just always think like, wow, like remember those days.
Well, I'm glad you're still following it. You know, it's a great sport, and the great thing is it transitions to a lot of success in UFC as well. You know, so it's pretty cool. It's cool that you're still sticking with it.
So I guess to start, since we're already kind of talking about that, how did you get involved in being the coach for the wrestling team?
Well, I wrestled in high school. I didn't wrestle in college. And when I was hired at Central, Jessica might remember Mr. Gray. He had left by that time. He was principal of Eastlake Elementary when you were there, if I'm not mistaken. So he was coaching the team, and I was a new kid, and I was like, hey, listen, I'm willing to volunteer and help out. And that's what I did, you know? So he was coaching, and he was going to be doing it alone. And I was willing to volunteer, and I wanted to help out, and that's what I ended up doing. And then after, I think he coached for 3 years, and then his son was born. And then, well, he and I coached together for 3 years, and then his son was born, and then he kind of turned over the reins to me. And we struggled for a little bit of time, but then the PAL program got really strong thanks to a individual in town, Danny Illick. And and then we did really well, and then I transitioned to my supervisor role. But yeah, that was fun. I got to know some families in town really, really well, and that was always a nice thing about coaching, that they become kind of like your extended family because you spend so much time with the kids. So so yeah, it was a good way to get some of those kids too that were a little rambunctious in class to come out for the team, you know, exert some of that energy, and it usually would work for the better for everyone involved. So that's how I did it.
And I want to say, like, when I was doing the stats, we were like really good. I remember like we won a lot.
Yeah, we were. That's when the tide started turning and started changing for us. And a lot of it had to do with Danny Illick's contributions, because his son Michael, who actually is he graduating this? He might be graduating from WPI this year. He got I think a partial scholarship there.
Oh,
but
awesome.
He was wrestling. He wanted his son to have a good surrounding team. Yeah. And that's what he did. He would sit there and he'd grab all these kids, put them in his car from the tournaments. And that's how the team got really, really strong. And,
that's really awesome too. You know? It's awesome when you see like as a coach too, like the community come together for the sport. And you're right, like I feel like troubled kids really excelled in wrestling because it gave them structure and it gave them like a community. If they had like a bad home life, they would have like the team there. So that's really cool.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. You know, it's a sport that teaches a lot about dedication and just work ethic. And for some of these kids, that's what they need. They needed that structure. And they ended up doing pretty well, you know. And some of them, they were just good kids that were very athletic, came out and were excellent, you know. So it's always nice when you win rather than you lose, you know.
Yeah, that's true. So then your main thing as an educator, tell us, like, so let's start with the journey of like, how did you know you wanted to be an educator, and like, what was the journey you went on?
All right. So I hated middle school. And when I got to high school, My freshman English teacher. I hated middle school English particularly because it was a lot of drill and kill with grammar, and it wasn't like it wasn't like self-selected reading and things that you can really delve into and kind of just use your imagination. So I got to high school, and I'm actually still very close to him to this day. His name is Dave Gould. I still call him Mr. Gould. But yeah, he was just awesome because I'll never forget this. He actually made me play Juliet in class when we were doing a reading of Romeo and Juliet. So I was like the little 5', 95-pound Juliet. And then my friend, she played Romeo. So we had a good time with that. But
that's pretty funny.
What ended up happening was he ended up just really pushing me and kind of saying, listen, you're way smarter than you're giving yourself credit for. And my kids are just pulling my headphones here. Okay, so they're out right now.
Dad life.
All right. So what ends up happening is he kind of encourages me. He ends up encouraging me to take honors English sophomore year. And it kind of changed the trajectory of my educational career in high school. I was a terrible math student. Still am.
Me too.
Struggled with math, but anything that was humanities based or that didn't involve math too much. So like my first two sciences I did pretty well in, but when it got to like physics and chemistry,
me too.
Yeah, that's where I was like, okay, I'm done with this.
Yep. Somehow I made it through high school never having to take chem. I was like, this is a success.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. I wish I could have figured that out. But yeah, so it was Mr. Gould, and then I had two wrestling coaches that really impacted me too. It was and both have both passed away in recent years. So it was Mr. Hickok and then Mr. Trudgeon, and both of them were kind of like, you're a pretty good kid, man. You need to start taking things a little bit more seriously in terms of your academics, which I always did because I was scared of my mom to death, and she was the hammer, but then my dad was like the hammer of Thor. So like if I wasn't listening to mama, then here comes Papa Bear. And, I had an older brother and sister who also kind of looked out for me too. So my sister's close to 10 years older than me. My brother was 8 years older. So they always kept me on the right path and just always really reinforced making good decisions and, make sure you're hanging around with the right people. It's okay to say no, that kind of stuff. So yeah. And at that point, after freshman year, I was kind of like, I want to do this, And then what solidified it for me was my senior year. I had a history teacher that I learned absolutely nothing in. That person will remain nameless. But at that particular point in time, they would actually go out, they'd put on C-SPAN, walk out of the room and have like a cigarette break out in the back. And we're like, where is this guy going? So I always thought I was going to be an English person, like English teacher. And then after I had this terrible history experience, I got to college and I went to Montclair State, which is a great education school.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When I got there, I kind of made the decision of, all right, you know what? Maybe I'll go with history because I never want a kid to experience what I experienced my senior year.
That's interesting.
But I'll have the fun attitude of Mr. Gould in class, because he was always cracking jokes, just made things very lively for us, and made English really, really interesting. It was almost like did you have Mr. Mulrooney as a teacher by any chance?
Okay, I guess I should have said too, my older sister, you had her as a student, so we've referenced her before, but my Jessica had Mulrooney, and she would tell all the stories about how great he was, and I graduate Parsippany, and then the next year he's the freaking principal. He's the principal, right? Yeah, and so everybody talks about, I don't know if you know who Nick Spiller is, but I did a rad chat with him a couple weeks ago, and he talks about how Mulrooney like changed his senior year. I was like, oh, how amazing.
He's a great guy, unbelievable individual. But Mulrooney and Gould, very similar. They're super, super intelligent, super funny and witty, with phenomenal vocabulary, so it was one of those things that Mr. Gould would joke with us and like call us something, and it's like, all right, we got to write this down and look it up, like, well, what did you reference? But it was one of those things that it was like, I want to be funny like him. I want kids to really enjoy learning, but I'll just do it in the history department. And then I got into history because I was like, I probably won't have to read as much. That was I think I read even more as a history major. But everything worked out really well. Parsippany was one of 2 job offers coming out of college, and that's like unheard of for history teachers. And I always envisioned myself being like a high school history teacher.
Oh, okay.
But then what ended up happening was I got placed as a middle school social studies teacher in Livingston for my student teaching.
Okay.
And it was like the greatest experience ever. I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. And the kids at that age level, they're very quirky, and they still look at you as like the cool person, And I was like, this is fun. Like, I'll totally do this. And that's what ended up happening,
Oh, that's cool. Were you local to the area, or did you have to like how is it to be a teacher? Like, do you have to move closer to where you're placed, or did you
no, not necessarily. So I went to Dover High School, graduated from Dover, and Dover, door to door from my parents' house to Montclair State was about 25 minutes.
Oh, okay. So you're all in the same areas.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad at all. So I'd live at Montclair during the week. Let's see here. I was a ambassador there, giving tours like during the week. And on the weekends, I'd come home, and I had another job where I'd work at a factory. And it, like I want a Mustang, so I had to get a job. I wanted decent clothes, and my parents were like, "Listen, we'll pay for college, but like some of this other stuff, you got to do on your own." Yeah. And it all circles back to wrestling. I kept saying to myself, if I can wrestle for 4 years, I could do this. Yeah. And that's what I ended up doing. And then the placement from Montclair, I got really lucky because they can place you anywhere. They can place you in an urban area such as Newark, Patterson, Elizabeth, areas like that. And then they can place you in suburban areas like your Parsippany's, your Livingstons, Milburns, all those areas. So I didn't really have a preference as I like graduating, or not graduating, but entering the program. But I am glad that I was able to go to Livingston because of the individual that I worked with there as my co-teacher. She was phenomenal. So it was just super, super helpful, and it just guided me on the right path. So
that's awesome. And then, so once you realized you like really liked 7th grade, how was it to then transition to be like the main teacher after student teaching? And how is it to get your first teaching job? Like, what is that experience like?
When I tell you, I was so lucky. I swear, I was just number one Parsippany. At that point, it was 2000, and there were a lot of teachers that were retiring. So Parsippany alone, the year that I got hired, had 100 new hires. Oh, wow. And they did a whole article, and I was lucky enough to be in the article with Mr. Ferresso as like a new history teacher versus the experienced one. And it was a challenge. And the reason it was a challenge was the demographics of Livingston at the time were very different than the demographics of Parsippany. And when I came here, the other piece to that puzzle too is when I went into student teaching, my student teaching semester was the second half of the year. So when you go in the second half of the year, you already have like classroom dynamics established in the sense of your classroom management's already established by the main teacher. The kids already have their learning expectations. You're coming into a really good situation. So what ended up happening for me when I came here were, number one, the classroom sizes were much bigger at Central. I was averaging probably like 18 to 20 kids at Heritage Middle School. And then here, and in some cases like 12 kids. And then here when I got to Central, I was looking at classes of 30, 25 was like the average. Yeah. So it was just a lot. And it was just different demographics and the diversity piece too. So it required a lot of differentiation, a lot of patience, and I was just missing that classroom management piece. So it was a serious struggle my first year, and I got put on an improvement plan and all that stuff that I have no shame in talking about, because
Yeah.
again, if you're new to a profession, you need to self-reflect, and you need to have people telling you what you're doing wrong. And I'm glad that I had that support system around me that was able to do that. And again, it just set me on a different trajectory my second year. Like, second year started without a blip, and it was smooth sailing after that.
Yeah.
And I was just very grateful for that. But that first year I was like, oh my God, what am I doing?
It's really cool that you're open about talking about that too, because you think like, oh, like as a student, you're just like, oh, this teacher's been here, like they know what they're doing, but like also the teacher's like learning as well. So I think that's really cool to touch on that. Like your first year was a little bit of a struggle.
Oh, big time, big time. And I wouldn't change it for the world, because you learn so much, and I grew so much from my first to second year, that again, it impacted me professionally. And it's something that I talk about with new teachers, that if I go in to see a teacher and I see them struggling, I'm very upfront, and I'm like, listen, I know your struggles because I suffered through them. So if I'm giving you some practical recommendations, I highly recommend that you do them,
Yeah.
because I know that they can work. And you just have to be open about people giving you feedback and accepting that feedback and moving forward with it. Those that don't do too well with receiving feedback tend to struggle a little bit longer, until they realize, like, you know what, maybe Juan wasn't, being too hard on me. And I look at any kind of administrative role as a coaching role. It's not a dictatorship. Every once in a while, you have to get firm, and you have to say, no, this is the way it's going to be. But really, the goal is to be a coach and to try and help people. And these are your areas of strength. These are your areas that you can develop. Let's kind of focus here so we can get you up to here, and a yin and a yang, so.
What do you think is like, so for people that like aren't teachers and maybe don't understand, why is having a bigger class, I mean, besides the obvious, just like you're handling way more students, why is that such a difference of teaching?
The first year, I would say it was the biggest struggle, because I ended up having big classes after that too. I was in the classroom for 9 years, and for 7 of those 9 years, I had like large numbers, compared to other districts, or even some colleagues over at Brooklawn. But for a first year teacher, when you have a large amount of kids, what ends up happening is, the closer your desks are, the more apt kids are to start talking to one another. The harder it is for you to walk up and down aisles to kind of gauge students where they're at, and just, circulate the classroom. Because although it seems like, oh, here goes Mr. Cruz again walking around, it's actually very effective, because, let's say you are looking at your phone, just by me getting up and kind of walking by you, you're going to think twice about taking out the phone. So there are those little things that take place when you have a very crowded classroom. The fun part about having a big classroom are the discussions that take place, because you have so many more opinions, and the discussion becomes way richer, which is a lot of fun. But just, when you have a big group of people, more people usually get a little rowdier. And that's really what the cause is. And then sometimes too, it's, what's the makeup of the classroom? Are they 2 buddies right next to each other? All right, well, have to move them and use the 4 corners of the classroom, So it's like, all right, that one right there, he can't be at the front, because no matter if I put him in the front, then the rest of the class is going to react. If I put him in the back corner, though, I take away the audience. So they're just little tricks.
It's funny you say that, because in Mr. Schaefer will probably, it's funny because I still say Mr. too, because like that's how I knew people. But he would do that to me because I was a little chatty, and at the time my best friend was Megan Pereira, and she would sit next to me, and he would have us all the time. So it's funny you say that, because you're right. Like the psychology of being next to your friend, you just want to talk.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's that whole comfort level thing of, oh, yay, this person's here.
That was my one struggle. I was a chatty student. I liked to talk.
But you know what though? But you were respectful. You weren't like one of these kids that if you got called out, you were, you know, like stomping around like whatever.
It was always embarrassing when you got called out. You're like, oh shoot.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, here we go again.
Yeah.
You know?
Another good thing you pointed out is the cell phone use, because at least for my experience, cell phones were just becoming big in middle school for my age, I want to say. I remember I didn't really get a cell phone until middle school. So I can only imagine how, as that trend progressed, like being a teacher now and people, it's like your life is your cell phone. Like that's a good point. Like having cell phones was just really becoming super popular during my time in middle school. And then I can only imagine what happened post that.
Yeah, it changed a lot and it became very, very challenging, especially when, like when the more intuitive phones start coming out, right? So like when I was still teaching, it was still like the flip phones, you know. So like 2009, you had the Razor, and the Razor was the big thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you had these smartphones coming out, like oh my God, what was it? The BlackBerry, right?
Yeah, the BlackBerry was first, or the switch phone.
Yep. Right. And then you had the iPhones and the Galaxy coming out, which were so intuitive and easy for the kids to just switch back and forth in terms of the interface, that
Yeah.
it made it very, very challenging for teachers. Okay. All right. He wants something. On a separate note, he was princesses. I'll let you know. I'll tell you that in a second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my little guy. But yeah, the cell phones made it challenging in the sense that, number one, you had some kids that were kind of sneaking videos, right? You also had kids that were sneaking in pictures of like assessments and passing them on to their friends. And, you know, there's code of ethics and code of conduct, especially at the high school level when kids were doing this. And it was kind of causing an issue. And it's still an issue, but you don't really hear about it as much because I think everyone's kind of adapted to it.
Okay.
And there's some teachers too that'll say, hey, listen, there's a video that I posted on my Google Classroom. Watch it on your phone and answer the questions on your computer now, you know, on either the tablet that you have or the Chromebook. So it's almost like, since it's been accepted, it's kind of caused some of the minor issues to go away. And there are safety measures too, you know, like with computers, there are different apps that you can download to kind of control what the kids are seeing and what they're doing, preventing them from, you know, accessing Google or any kind of internet database or browser while they're testing. So there are measures out there to kind of control those variables.
Oh, that's cool. What do you think is an example of the biggest transition from your first year to your second year was? Besides the classroom size, because we already talked about that.
Biggest difference?
Or like maybe because you said, you know, you got put on like, you know, watch for
Yeah.
So maybe the biggest like, yeah.
I think the one, wow, that's a good question. There are a couple things. One, that summer going into my second year, I was a co-director of assistant director of a summer camp in Dover because I was still living at home. And I got to work with one of my wrestling coaches, Mr. Hickok, who was the director. So he and I would spend a lot of time after hours. I would always ask him for advice, like, Coach, what would you do if kids are just calling out? And he's like, all right. And he would give me the quirkiest little examples that worked.
Oh, really?
And I remembered him doing these things when he was an accounting teacher. As a wrestling coach, he was like a drill sergeant, hardcore, in your face, but he would get the most out of his kids. You know, he'd make you into a winner, would make you believe you're a winner. And I'm forever grateful for that, you know. And then I'd run through a wall for him. And then him as a teacher was like this complete, funny, goofy guy that would, and again, this is one of his examples. If kids started talking, he'd go from like talking at a regular pitch to talking in like a little mouse voice. And he's like, you know what happens with that one? And I'm like, no. He's like, once you guys started realizing that I was talking in a lower voice, you would shut up because you knew you had to listen to me because I
Yeah.
was giving
Oh, that's
directions.
smart. That's
And these
smart.
are all things that I tried and worked and
Oh,
worked.
that's cool.
And
That's cool.
then the other one that he said that was hilarious was, he's like, yeah, you remember the time I used to talk to the board? He's like, guess what? It would make you guys stop talking in class. And he would turn around to the board and just be like, okay, so if I'm going to balance my checkbook and I'm getting a deposit of blah, blah, blah. And we'd be like, wait, what is he doing? Is he teaching to us? But we'd all stop and look at him. And then he'd carry on with his lesson. And there was like no issues. And then he would do stupid little things like finger calisthenics. You know, he'd be like, all right, everyone, stop for a second. You know, and right now, these are called like brain breaks. But he would say, all right, everyone, can you do this? You know, and then he'd switch up like the directions. And here you have a class full of sophomores and seniors all trying to do these silly exercises. But it worked and
That's
it got
funny.
kids focused. So these were all like little tricks that he was teaching me that I brought back to the classroom. And
Oh, that's cool.
I would say that the confidence level of kind of having a year under your belt, understanding how to really structure a lesson and using time frames, that was the other big piece, you know, like cutting back on the amount of time you would give kids to answer a do now. So 10 minutes, way too long. There's too much time for, you know, like if you have a recall question, that should only take you like a minute or two to answer. And then you can go into like a rich discussion for 3 to 5 minutes. If you have like an extended thinking question of, for example, like, you know, why was George Washington an effective president? Now you have like multiple responses coming in at you, and that can lead kids to really think about it, and that you can extend that response time. So it's
That's a
understanding
good way to put it.
it's understanding, thank you, it's understanding different kinds of questions that you're asking, the different kids that you're working with. You know, so for example, like if you're working with an honors level group of kids, because we had honors in middle school, it's like, okay, for these kids, maybe I'm going to give them 2 extended thinking questions, and then we're going to get together and have either Q&A or have the kids kind of talk them out. And then for like the general ed class, I'm only going to do one of those questions and make it a more focused discussion. And then depending on how they respond to that, then I can kind of branch out and go either deeper or let the kids start talking to another. So it was just a lot about becoming comfortable with your role in the classroom, having that year under your belt. And the other thing too is going out and observing master teachers, you know, like you, Mrs. Levine.
Yeah.
So like going out and seeing Mrs. Levine, you know, seeing her in her classroom on my periods off, going to see Mr. Gray, who was an English teacher, unbelievable English teacher, watching him deliver his lessons to kids, and just the fact that he did it, it was like, I mean, such a well-functioning machine.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And then there was, he's now the guidance counselor over at Lake Hiawatha, Mr. Radiotis. But
Okay.
he was there, and Mrs. Levine was my mentor, and then Mr. Radiotis was kind of like my unofficial mentor. So just going ahead and picking his brain constantly about like, you know, I have this issue, how would you handle it? And they were just very, very helpful with that. And then the other thing I would say is the parental contact, just being very upfront, contacting parents on the phone, not so much because email wasn't big.
Yeah, email
So
wasn't big.
it was contacting parents and just, you know, making that connection and letting them know that I really wanted to work with their kids and work with them and make this the best possible learning environment. Some parents appreciated that. Some others didn't. You know, there were some kids that you made happy. There were some kids that didn't like you no matter what happened. And that's all part of the trade, you know. But I would say those are probably the biggest things that probably influenced me to have a successful second year.
Oh, that's awesome. So you obviously talked about how you've had mentors that influenced you, but
Mhm.
when do you think you actually established your own teaching style? Like when you were like, okay, like this is my style now. Because obviously you know your mentors give you different inspirations, or do you
Yeah.
have a moment like that?
Another good question. You're like Howard Stern here. Holy shit.
Thank you,
Um,
thank you.
I okay, so second year, I would say I got my the pedagogy piece down of, okay, this is the way you structure a lesson, this is the way you manage a classroom. And I would insert like my humor in there at certain times, but I was still a little hesitant to, you know. I would say my third and fourth year is when I really felt like, all right, I'm doing a decent job, you know, like I'm coming up with some really interesting projects for the kids. They seem to be having fun. They're learning. I would say that was probably the time that it kind of showcased me coming out of my shell. You know, like second year I was still a little rigid, but getting better. And then third and fourth year was very helpful. And I would say that's kind of, I think when I would establish, I guess myself as the teacher in the classroom where I feel comfortable.
Yeah. I always remember like my memory was that, you know, obviously some kids like some teachers more than others, but I like from my experience, those social studies teachers, we called it social studies, but now is it just history?
No, it's social studies.
Social
It's still
studies.
social studies.
I just remember like if you had Mr. Schaefer or you had Mr. Cruz, but everyone just loved each of you guys. Like I never remember in this, and I'm just saying, like to be honest, like I don't ever remember anyone not liking either of you guys. But I also remember people loved you guys because they thought you guys were like best friends too, because you guys would always be like in the hallways talking and stuff. And my memory was like Mr. Schaefer was like the more quirkier one, and then everyone thought you were like a little more serious. So I remember when I was like a little afraid at first to be like, "Hi, Mr. Cruz, like I'm gonna be the stat. I asked to be the stat girl," but I just remember you had my sister, so I was like, at least I have an edge here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Jessica was great. So I never had any issues with her. She was quiet to participate when I would call on her. But yeah, Mr. Schaefer and I, Ryan, we're still very close
Oh,
to
that's
this
cool.
day.
Tell him I said hi.
I definitely will. He is a guidance counselor over at Morse Knowles. He's been doing
Oh,
that.
he's still the guidance counselor there. Awesome.
Yeah, he's been doing that.
Contact with him a little bit, and then
Probably like,
hard to follow up, but I remember when he did become a guidance counselor there.
yeah, he's a great guy. We were in each other's weddings.
I was gonna say, yeah, he got married too.
Yeah, so I got married October of 2009, and then he got married in May of 2010.
Awesome.
So yeah, he's like my little brother, you know.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. He just turned 40, you know, and he always called me like the old fart. And I'm like, yeah, right there, buddy. You know?
Up there.
Yeah. So yeah, he was a great addition to the program just because he was number one. He was one of Mrs. Levine's former students at Brooklawn.
I remember that was a thing too. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was extremely bright. Like he's one of those guys you would never expect him because he's so quiet and modest, but he's like one of these like super bright guys that you know, he had this presence about him and just some really great ideas for not being a traditionally trained teacher, because he went alternate route. But you know, we were like kind of dorky. We'd work on the weekends together. We would like meet out in Morristown, you know, grab a bite to eat and a beer over at like the Famished Frog and like write our lesson plans and that's what we did. But we loved it. You know, we loved working with the kids.
That's cool. I just always remember like as a student, we always thought you guys were best friends. So it was cool when you learn like, oh, they were really cool friends.
Yeah, we were really tight. And, you know, we disagreed like brothers sometimes and, you know, got on each other's nerves. But that's what happens when you're good friends, you know, and it just, yeah, I miss him being in Parsippany, but he's doing a great job.
Yeah. So. That's awesome. So you said you were seventh grade teacher, you said 9 years, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in that time frame, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it. No, go.
In that time frame, I'm sure you obviously accomplished so much. But what do you think, looking back on just the teaching part, was your biggest accomplishments?
Biggest accomplishments,
or like most fulfilling accomplishments, and like something comes to your head first.
To be honest with you, that's a tough question because I really enjoyed working with the kids. Like that's the most fulfilling part. And that's what I guess I missed as a supervisor, was that daily interaction with the kids. biggest, in terms of accomplishments, I had the good fortune of being named Teacher of the Year in 2006 for Central, right? So that, to me, that was like, oh my God, I can't believe this, because you're chosen by your peers, you know, and it's one of those things that you totally don't expect. But at the same time, you're just really kind of floored and honored.
Yeah.
And I considered that like a reflection of what my parents taught me about having a good work ethic and, you know, moving forward in that regard, you know, just doing the right thing, helping people, so on and so forth. I guess what I'm most proud of is it, like when I left Central, I felt that the kids and the teachers there were kind of like, oh man, you know, we're missing out on a good guy here.
Yeah.
Because I really enjoyed my time there. And, you know, like I lived at Central. I'd get there at like 6:30, leave at like 6:30 or 7 at night because of coaching.
Yeah.
But, you know, it comes a time in life where you have to make a transition, and that's what ended up happening. But I would say that, you know, just the fact that I had such a great relationship with my colleagues and the kids. I really loved the community there when I was there, and it was a lot of fun. And I never felt like I was going to work, because
Yeah, that's awesome.
everyone was always pulling for each other when you were there. Like if someone was having a bad day, there was another teacher there to run the copies for them, or to go out and get them a cup of coffee or something. You know, it was a great support system.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Because I feel like I was just telling someone this the other day, like when you work somewhere, you don't really know. I mean, you like to think you know, but you don't really know if people like you. Like you just are coworkers. So of course they have to like accept you and tolerate you. But when you leave work and you come and visit, that's when you know if someone likes you because you could tell they want to talk to you.
Yeah,
Or they're
you're
just
right.
excited to see you.
You're right. You're 100% right. You know, and that was definitely that was hard leaving, and just not having that support system. It was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
you go from a building of kids and teachers who are just in your corner and want to help you, and then you go to, like, as a supervisor, you're almost like you're on an island by yourself, and you're trying to figure out, like, okay, how am I helping this teacher? What am I doing with this curriculum? So there were just a
Yeah.
lot of different variables to deal with, and it made it a challenge again for that first year. So
Yeah, that's true. So before we go to your next section of life, just kind of a little wrap up of this section, unless there's, more you would like to say about it. But I always want to ask this because I feel like when I was a seventh grader, I went through a lot of stuff, like a lot of dark stuff, a lot of sad times, whatever. And I always felt for me personally, I don't know why, I always felt like my teachers were kind of like my friends. Like once I had stopped being shy, I would like confide in them and they would like be
mhm.
mentors to me. How was it like when you had certain like maybe there's some kids that have great lives, you never really have to deal with them, but for kids that are maybe more troubled or have trouble at home, how was it to be a teacher for those types of kids?
It's probably an even more important job, you know, because in some cases you're playing teacher, but you're also playing like mom, dad, or big brother or uncle, whatever it might be, to try and keep those individuals on the right path in life, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes you win and there's some success stories, and then sometimes you lose, and you find out that you know, some of your kids have passed on, some of your former kids, and that always breaks your heart, you know.
Yeah.
Some end up in trouble, some end up in trouble and make the right decision afterwards, and kind of get on the right path. But it I would say the majority of kids that I would worry about the most were those kids that kind of had those struggles at home, you know, or
Yeah.
they didn't have that consistency at home that I was privy to growing up. Um, and it's that was just mentally and emotionally, it's very draining. So for individuals
Mhm.
who are not teachers, that's something that is often overlooked.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's a very difficult and challenging piece of the job, because you put so much into trying to help these kids, and in some cases it works out, and in some cases it doesn't, and that breaks your heart, you know, because it's so much of an effort and so much of your mental and physical being, and trying to help one, two, maybe three individuals, and it doesn't happen, and it's hard. It's very taxing. That's where all these grays came from.
Because you think, like, I feel like middle school is such an age where kids are really figuring out who they are. And I always, like, I mean, for me personally, like, I always have to shout out like Miss Flynn and she's married now, her name's changed, but at the time Miss Norman, I know it's not Miss Norman anymore.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But and like Miss Schaefer and you, like, especially because when I was involved with the wrestling, it like got me to like have an after school activity. I would like remember like in my middle school days, like those teachers really shaped me and like took an interest, like, because I can't say like I wasn't a troublemaker. I just had like a lot of like family issues. And so I feel like when I felt like the teachers actually took an interest in my life, it was like, oh, like maybe I'm a loser.
Yeah, and you had that experience in middle school, and that's where I had mine in high school, and that, again, going back to my experiences as a high school student and saying to myself, like, if I ever become a teacher, I want to be like these people that really influenced me because they really helped me out. And that's what I always wanted to do. And I hope that I was able to do that for the majority rather than, the minority of kids.
Yeah.
But you bring up the after school activities. When I was teaching, and if I did find students that were struggling with something, I would always try and encourage them to go out for something after school, because a lot of that time, if they are struggling at home, if they have an after school activity, it's a great outlet for them. And like you said, it gives you an opportunity to, you're learning about a sport, right? But then at the same time, it's like, all right, this person gave me an opportunity to do this, I'm going to do it well, and we're going to go from there, But yeah, it's getting back to your original question. It's all about those kids that are struggling, and that mental exhaustion that goes into it. And, just wishing that you could adopt some of these kids, like if that were the case, I'd probably have like 25 kids right now, but it's a very rewarding and fulfilling job. But it's also very mentally taxing.
Yeah. I always want to ask that because I feel like my personal experience had teachers in that age that like really gave a shit. And then when I went on to like, well, high school, I because I had that experience in middle school, high school, I found certain people that also kind of catered to that as well. But in college, it's a whole different experience. And you have like kind of like you said about your experience of the history teacher who didn't teach you anything. You're like, wow, like thank God I had like teachers back then that really like gave a shit, because when you get to college you realize nobody really cares.
Yeah. And again, I was lucky. In college I had 3 teachers that I just
That's true. Your experience was positive.
3 professors,
but true.
For the most part, you're right, in the sense that it's like, all right, you're paying to come here, I'm not going to listen to mommy and daddy anymore, blah 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 blah. It is what it is. But if you seek out certain individuals, and you pick their brains, and they start to realize like, oh, this kid, they have some interesting point of views here. Make some really cool connections in that regard, and move forward from there. But again, it's not common at the college level.
Yeah, that's true. I only have one college professor who I'll like remember always, and like I have them on Facebook. And like I feel like when you are able to open up to the teacher, which I always thought was cool about you and stuff, was that you like wanted to listen to the kids. Like, some people don't care, but like you took the initiative to like want to talk and listen. And even now you're doing this podcast with me, which is so rad. So kind of to further now, so as you're wrapping up your 9 years now, where does your life go?
So I had always said I wanted to be like a supervisor of the subject, because I wanted to coach new teachers and work with some of the more experienced teachers. So I got a master's was it my 3rd year in teaching, and that's another piece that helped me with becoming a more effective teacher.
Oh, okay.
So after that, I took a couple of years off, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back because I want to get my supervisor and principal cert. So I ended up, I think I was I coached 1 year with Mulrooney. He came down and he volunteered and helped me down at Central. And he was going through a program. And he's like, oh, you should totally do it. You know, it's great. You'd be great at it. You like kids. That's the most important thing, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, okay. So I signed up for Montclair. I went back to Montclair for their ed leadership program.
Oh, nice.
And, the first class I was in, I ended up meeting my future wife.
Oh, I love love.
Yeah, well, she goes, or current wife.
True.
Yeah, but she was there. It was one of her last classes, and she walked in, saw me, and was like, "Who's that guy?" No, I'm kidding.
You were saying that about her, like, who's that girl?
Yeah. It was the other way around. It was the other way around. And the cool thing is that class was just awesome because it was a bunch of teachers that were going for their principal cert and their supervisor cert. So we all remained close friends. But you know, I wanted to go back. I wanted to get my supervisor certificate. And when I was entering my last, because for a supervisor cert, what ends up happening is if you have a master's, you have to do 4 classes and you can get that certificate. Then if you want to be a principal, you have to finish the master's program and do some testing, take a test. So, and like an internship. So with the supervisor certificate, I did my 4 classes, and then the supervisor's position became available because Dr. Don Vito transitioned to the director of curriculum.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, she and a couple of the other supervisors that I had worked with just through the years in different like committees, they're like, you should consider it. You know, it might be a good thing. You know, nothing's guaranteed, but you should consider applying. So I was like, okay. So, you know, when you're a little younger and I don't want to say like egotistical because I always felt I was kind of humble. But I was like, I have nothing to lose. Why not? You know?
Yeah. More of a reason to apply.
Yeah. I applied for the position. I ended up getting the position, and I ended up getting hired September, and then I got married that October.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I made that transition. It was a big year for changes.
Yeah.
But it was funny because, you know, I remember talking to Mrs. Levine about it, and she goes, so if you're the finalist, are you going to do it or what? You know? And I'm like, because I call her mom, you know, I'm like, Ma, I don't know. She's like, what do you mean you don't know? I was like, you know, I really had to suffer through so many losing seasons as a wrestling coach. And right now we have a powerhouse team. We came in second this year. I think we're going to win it next year. And she looks at me and she goes, are you kidding me? You're going to turn down this opportunity for that? You know, she's like, come on.
Commitment to the team.
Yeah. And she's like, Juan, like this can change your educational path. And she gave me some really good advice.
Oh, that's awesome.
And as a result, I was like, you know what? She's right. You know, like this might be my only opportunity ever to get in this position. And I ended up doing that. And then what I ended up realizing was, number one, the supervisor job, you're really like in the background, right? So it's almost like you're the curriculum heartbeat of the district because you have to update curriculum. You have to do the professional development for teachers. You have to do a lot of observations, observing of teachers, hiring, things of that nature. But what I realized was I'm like, man, I'm really missing the kids and I'm missing the dynamic of being in a building.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing it because it was one of those things, again, speaking to Mark Gray, he always gave me very good advice. He's like, you don't become a master in something until you're like 5 years in, you know, from 5 years and above, that's when you can really look back and say, all right, I did this pretty well. This I got to work on, but this, I'm really good at this. And I'll never say and give myself credit and say, I'm really good at this. The one thing I'll say I'm good at is making deadlines. Like that's one thing, give me a deadline. And
it's very important,
you know? But I transitioned to that piece. I really enjoyed it because I always said I wanted to coach new teachers. I was able to hire my student teacher, Mr. Hernandez, and he replaced me.
Oh, I remember. I feel like I remember him.
Yeah. So he came in, replaced me. And then there were some changes that took place in district where I ended up doing social studies and world languages together for a few years. So that my responsibility doubled and the pay was the same, and all I got was a thank you. It is what it is. It was a great learning experience. Then I did social studies and music for a little bit. Then I was director of secondary education for 2 years. Then that position was eliminated. So I went back to being a supervisor. And then this year, Mr. Courtwright, the principal at Rockaway Meadow, ended up receiving a very well-earned promotion to Director of Pupil Personnel Services, which means he's in charge of all of the special education programs in district.
Oh, that's cool.
So, because of the pandemic, there is a very small pool of applicants out there to be like interns, because that's usually what ends up happening. They'll get someone to be a replacement for a short amount of time and then go into like a more of an interview process during the summer.
Yeah.
But they felt that they needed someone who had experience, who's been doing the supervisor curriculum piece for a while and just a leadership role for a while. And they kind of asked me if I was interested, and I spoke to my wife, and she's like, I've always said, I think you'd make a great principal. And that was kind of the blessing. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it.
Oh, and cool. Congrats.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. And I've been loving it so far, seeing the little kids just come in there. It's a very awkward year because of the pandemic, and, we have cohorts. So you only have in the building each time, like each cohort, you have roughly like 25 to 30% of the kids. So the classes are much smaller, but they're so excited to be there. And they're little kids. They're just so stinking cute, and the teachers are real sweet. And it's just a lot of fun because now I'm part of a community again, whereas before I was kind of in the background. But before I made my decision, like I spoke to Dr. Mulrooney, I spoke to Mr. Gray, obviously my wife, and to people that have always really kind of steered me in the right direction educationally. And I was like, all right, man, I'm going to give it a shot. Oh, Mr. Ricker too. Actually, no, I didn't speak to Mr. Ricker. And he was kind of like, man, you didn't say anything to me. I thought you'd come to me and like ask me some questions, which was
give you a little shit there.
Yeah, he's just another really good friend. And he's like, man, you kept that under wraps. But I'm the kind of person that, when there's like a big decision like this, I'm going to try and just keep it quiet. I don't really want to bother people with anything that's stressing me out. I kind of want to deal with it myself, and my poor wife and kids have to deal with it. So
that's really incredible journey, because you kind of got a full circle back to what you originally started with, which is really incredible too.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, just kind of going back a little bit, how was it? I don't know if this is going to be too personal of a question, but how was it to start a whole new career path in a sense? I mean, you're obviously still in education, but in a different form, and then to first get married, and then kind of to say like, you're doing so much and not getting paid probably what you were worth. How was that of like, and your home life, and like you're like, that's two big life changes, and I'm sure that I don't know how do you deal with that?
It was tough. Again, going back to those first few months on the new job, it was very, very stressful because I had to. So the state comes in and they do a review. It's called QSAC, NJ QSAC, and it's all about like quality control regarding the schools. So when I transitioned into that job, into that role as supervisor, I had to update all the social studies curriculum guides in like a 2-month span for them to come in and check off all the X's and O's to say, all right, you're in compliance. So there were a lot of restless nights and weekends where, I wasn't seeing my future wife because I was doing this work. I was, panicking. I would say that's probably the closest experience I've ever had to like like a high level of anxiety, and kind of going to the doctor and saying like, how do I deal with this? You know? But at the time too, I was a little younger. I was able to go to the gym, and that was kind of like my outlet, you know, like I was able to get that stress out. But the job responsibilities were kind of cutting into that. So it was kind of compacting the issue, you know? So everything was like coming together. It was like the perfect storm of, excuse my language here, of like, holy shit, like all these things are happening, you know?
Holy F.
Yeah, the only thing that I really had to enjoy and look forward to was I was getting married, you know, and like it's like this awesome situation is going to happen in a month, so I have to look forward to that. But then I have this other stuff, this workflow that I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to meet my deadlines? You know, I'm grateful that I was able to do it, but it was very, very stressful. And I would say that was probably the closest I ever came to suffering like a depression kind of state, because I was like, I was so bogged down. Like I just felt the weight of everything, you know, and it was very, very tough. Very tough.
I always like to ask that because I feel like it's such a human response, and like everyone deals with stress different. So it's cool that you said like you went to the gym and then you also had your wedding to look forward to. So that kind of helped. But it kind of shows the human aspect, like, yeah, all this amazing stuff has happened to you in your life, but like you've also dealt with like hard times.
Yeah. And then the other great thing about having a wife who's an educator is that when we had to prepare for CUSAC and I was doing social studies and world languages, she was like, all right, what can I help you with? You know, so I'd be like, all right, these courses of study right here, all you got to do is go in here and change the numbers on the Microsoft Word document. So I'd be at work working on some of them, and she'd be at home doing some of them to help me out. So that was extremely helpful in that regard. And it was a true team effort there. And something that I've said to my bosses in the past, it's like, listen, I got the stuff done, but I just want you to know, like, it was me staying up till 2 a.m. on a pretty regular basis, coming into work like on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, if that, and having a wife who was willing to help me out. So, you know, like if it wasn't for those things, I don't know if you would have gotten the stuff done.
And that's cool that you're honest about it. And I want to assume that like your wife being an educator too, that probably bonded you guys on another level, like where some people might not understand because you both work the same profession and kind of know that mental stress of being an educator.
Definitely. You know, prior to meeting my wife, you know, as a guy in his 20s, I dated other girls, and if they weren't educators, they didn't understand like my dedication to the job. And it wasn't their fault. They just, you know, I was someone I'm very type A when it comes to my job, and I wanted to do the right thing. And you know, my mom and dad had a phenomenal work ethic, and you know, that can impact your social life at times. And yeah, you're 100% right. You know, meeting my wife and having her understand the responsibilities of the job is, I mean, that it's so important. Because that just, she's kind of like, okay, I get it. Do what you got to do.
Yeah. Shout out to your wife.
Shout out to my wife. That's right. Yep.
So I want to say also too, what did whoop, that's like a stutter. Was being on the board, did it really open your eyes to how the school really functions in a way you might not have known being just a teacher? And not just saying like just a teacher, but like you're on another level of the school board.
So this is where it's really interesting, right? So I can give you the perspective from a supervisor, and then now as like an acting principal, and then as a teacher. So as a teacher, it's like your classroom, and then you're part of a school community, right? Your classroom, the kids will either worship you or they'll want to throw darts at you, right? But if you do a good job, the people will respect that, and they give you your space to do a good job, right? As a supervisor, it was kind of my job to help those teachers that were struggling become better teachers. And then for those teachers that were doing a great job to, you know, continue with that great job, try and push them out of their comfort zone a little bit if I could, or encourage them to do some professional development, to share their great practices. But then I got to see the dynamic of all 14 buildings, right? And I got to see how different buildings did things differently. So I always thought that the way I was doing my lesson plans was like the way it was supposed to be done. So then when I started observing and reviewing lesson plans, and I'm like, wait, this is acceptable, you know? And then I was told, yeah, it's acceptable because they have student-centered objectives, student-centered activities, and student-centered assessments. And I was like, oh, God, I could have done mine in like 20 minutes. I was taking hours, you know? But with that being said, like you learn that piece of it, and then you learn about each building's culture, you know? So you might have a building that is more diverse than another building that's only a mile away or 2 miles away. And that's what's wild about Parsippany. You know, you might have a building that has let's say they have, 45 ESL kids in that building, but then you go 2 miles away and that building only has 11 ESL kids, you know, or you might have a very diverse population and you might have like, let's say 6 languages spoken in one building in an ESL program and only like Spanish and Hindu spoken in another, or Hindi or Gujarati and Spanish. So that's kind of a cool dynamic. And then also the dynamic of the teachers and who likes to collaborate, who doesn't collaborate, whose department is more like a family, whereas who is more independent and kind of like, don't bother me, you know? So that was very, very interesting. But what I will say is that I've had a wonderful experience working with the teachers here, and regardless of their different departments, the one thing I can say with confidence is they're always about the kids and they want to do what's right by the kids.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's something to be very proud of as an educator and as now, you know, someone who lives in town. A lot of dedicated people here.
That's cool.
As a building principal, then the other piece of that is like learning. I'm just, you know, I just dipped my feet in the water, but it's interesting because, you know, I'm kind of learning of the school culture at Rockaway Meadow now, and it's an unbelievable culture, you know, because we have 4 autistic classrooms in the building. It's everyone is hands-on. It's a beautiful thing to see, you know, and just a little kid, so cute.
It must be even more special too, like to be back in the school district, like being a principal now that you have 2 kids of your own too. So you're kind of like, oh, they're my kids again, and like, and my other kids. I feel like, did you also like? I feel like obviously there's so many different changes between those 3 fields. Did you also really get the sense of like maybe when you were a teacher and you know stuff happens, maybe like promotions, etc., that's more political, but then when you came in on the curriculum base, did you really notice more politics, or do you notice it more in your teach? Like, how do the politics really play in the school district?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know per se if I would answer politics so much. What I would say is, as a teacher, you don't really see too much of the decisions that are being made. Let me rephrase that. When I was in the classroom, I wasn't, me personally, I wasn't seeing such an active role by the Teachers Association. It was just a different time frame. It was a different time period. I will say now the association is a little bit more active because of the pandemic, and they have some concerns, and they're voicing those concerns, which they have every right to. So it's as a building person, I didn't necessarily see that. As a supervisor, I saw it more often because in my first few years as a supervisor, we had to attend more board meetings more regularly. So you kind of got to see those interactions take place more often. And then now as a building individual, I really haven't had too many discussions per se regarding any kind of association concerns. I'm new to the job. But what I can say is that they've welcomed me with open arms, and they've been very receptive. And
Oh, that's
my whole
awesome.
goal right now is to really try and get to know them, to get to know the kids, and
Yeah.
try and make it a real seamless transition for everyone.
Yeah.
Because the person that was there before, Keith, was so great. But yeah, getting back, that's a really good question. And I would say that you definitely see more when you're a district employee, like a supervisor,
Mhm.
because you're just in so many different buildings, and you have
Yeah.
a broader perspective of what's taking place in those buildings, what are the concerns in those buildings, and then how those concerns are brought to the Board of Education.
Yeah.
Then as a principal, it's kind of like, okay, what's taking place in your building that's a concern or may make its way up to the board. You know, we
Yeah.
work more as a supervisor and as a principal, you work more often with the superintendent, assistant superintendent, things like that. But yeah, that's probably the best answer I could give you.
Yeah. I think that's good. I also feel like you mentioned before, like Parsippany. I feel like I always known it as like a small town, but it's really like kind of a big town because there's so many towns within Parsippany, but like
Yeah.
knows everybody in a sense. So I feel like it's such a small town. So then how was it to go from Parsippany to now Rockaway? Because I also in my perception, like Rockaway is more of a little like a little bit weller off city.
So I'm at Rockaway Meadow in Parsippany. Rockaway
Oh, okay,
Meadow.
okay.
So,
I'm
so I'm
thinking
still here.
Rockaway, the city.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
no, that's okay. Because when I told my dad that, he thought I was going to Rockaway too.
Yeah,
So
oh, okay. So you're
yeah,
still in Pacific. Oh, okay, okay.
I'm at the point in my career where it was one of those things that uh, I had opportunities earlier on in my supervisory career to make a transition to another school district.
Mhm.
It would have been advantageous in terms of pay, but now in terms of the position that I'm in, I've accrued tenure as a supervisor, as a and as a teacher, and in our current climate, it's a very dangerous thing to resign, give up that tenure in two different spots, and then
Yeah.
take on a job in another district. So that's why it was kind of like the perfect storm here of Rockaway Meadow is open. We need an acting principal. What are your thoughts? You know, think about it, get back to us. And that's kind of like why I was like, all right, yeah, I think this is the right time
Yeah.
to do it. If I don't do it now, I probably will never get this opportunity again, you know?
Yeah. That's good. That just shows you how long I've been out of Pacific. I thought of Rockaway, the city.
Yeah.
It's like,
So
oh, of course.
we have 10 elementaries here, two
I
middles
know
and
it's
two.
crazy.
So it's huge. It
That's
really
true.
is.
Yeah. You don't realize it until like I like feel like yeah, when I was younger, I thought like, oh, it's whatever. But now you're like, oh, it is pretty big, pretty large and in charge.
Yeah, yeah. You're not kidding.
I know I've taken so much of your time, but I guess two like wrap up questions would be
Sure.
now that you brought it up, the tenure. How is it to achieve tenure? And for people that don't really understand what that is as a school profession, what is the tenure?
Okay. So tenure is when I was teaching, it was 3 years and a day. And what I mean by that is the first day of your fourth year, you earn tenure, which basically means that um, you have a protected job, unless if there are extensive cutbacks and they have no place for you anymore. Then your job could be eliminated in that regard. But it's basically like a job protection under the union, under the Parsippany Troy Hills Education Association here. Tenure is very common with education in general. The New Jersey changed tenure laws in the sense that teachers now have to be working in the classroom for 4 years, and their first day, their fifth year, they
Mm.
get tenure. There are certain rules that I have to go back and look into, and I used to know these like the back of my hand when I was in the middle of like a hiring craze as a social studies supervisor. But there's certain rules now that, you know, if you have ineffective ratings, it impacts the time that you're accruing your tenure.
Mm.
Uh, but basically, when you're a teacher, you have to prove yourself for those 4 years to earn that tenure. And typically, once you become a tenured professional, you've established a good rapport in your building. You've become a part of that community. You've established yourself as a good professional and as someone who's going to contribute to the education profession. Tenure also exists for principals and supervisors too. So again, it's a job protection in the sense that, if there's certain decisions that are being made, you can voice your opinion and not get fired over it. So for example, like if I wanted to speak on behalf of the Principals and Supervisors Association in Parsippany at a board meeting and express a concern, if I had one, I could do that with the understanding that there's not going to be any vindictive action taken against me or my job eliminated. Right. Yeah. But gratefully, I'm very grateful and very lucky that we have a very good working relationship with the Teachers Association, with the board, and with our superintendent in central office. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. But again, it's a job protection that basically allows you to, say that, hey, I don't agree with this. I'm going to voice my opinion, but I'm going to do ultimately what's right for the kids.
Yeah.
It also allows for, labor negotiations to take place too. And also, there's that protection of, well, what if I disagree with this and I start voicing my concerns at board meetings regarding labor contracts? You're not going to fire me because I'm voicing my disagreement.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it works. It's a job protection.
Yeah, that's good though. I feel like so much school in our lives that just to have a conversation about like the process for your journey, it's like so interesting. It's like wow, like you go to all these schools, you don't really understand the process, but like teachers really like hats off to you guys.
Thank you. And I'm sure if someone sees this video that's an educator and knows the laws better than I do right now, that it'll be a good thing. The one thing I do know is that as a teacher and as a administrator, if you do your job well, you always put the kids' interests first, you're good to go.
Yeah.
It's those teachers that or teachers, administrators, educators in general that make questionable decisions that end up getting in trouble. That's what it comes down to. Like with any job, do what's right for the kids and you'll be okay.
Yeah. And then obviously the big elephant of the world is COVID. And so as now going to like a new principal, did you have to like I feel like everyone had to kind of readapt to the world and like how to teach and how to go to school and etc. Like I'm so grateful I'm out of school when this happened because I don't know how I would have learned properly. But how do you think you had to readapt to the current state of the world?
It was tough. It was a tough situation just because when everything took place, when it started, it was a 2-week shutdown, and then it just kept getting extended and extended because it is such, it's such a terrible, terrible sickness.
Yeah.
And it's so contagious. And it's one of those things that it may react differently to you than it would to me. And you just don't know all these variables, right? So the district and many districts in the United States took precautionary measures, ended up going remotely for the remainder of the year. And as a supervisor, there were points that we were doing virtual observations and popping into classes through like Google Meet. And let me tell you, it was a really cool learning experience in the sense that teachers are unbelievable at adapting. It was just unreal. And, I give them all the credit in the world for how quickly they were able to just adapt to the situation and make it work for their kids in the classroom, their families at home, and just make the best of the situation. Is it the picture perfect ideal situation? It's not. We all want to be back at school. We all want that. But with CDC guidelines and just how contagious this particular sickness is, we really have to be cautious. And that's why we're taking we're implementing these strategies, and we're taking these steps to try and minimize the amount of kids in a school at any particular time. And then we're giving the option for also full-on virtual learning for those kids that do want to stay home. But you know, I got to give it up to teachers. I got to give it up to the kids for being able to adapt. Some kids are adapting way better than others. And I got to give it up to the parents too, because the parents have done a hell of a job of working with these kids and helping them adapt to the situation. And it's very difficult for kids in terms of socialization and for support, you know, because being in school is a support system. Socializing with your buddies in person is a support system. But this sickness is preventing that, and you have to respect it. My brother, who's a respiratory therapist, he basically said, he's like, listen, I'm not an alarmist, but you have to respect what people are saying. You know, he's like, I'm not getting political about this, but just wash your hands, wear your masks, be safe, you know, because it's very, very contagious.
Yeah. And that's cool that you gave an ode to like everyone, teachers, parents, students, because you're right, like the parents now have to like act as like almost like teacher at home and get them on the computer, like depending on the grade level, but yeah, it's pretty.
And then I forgot the administrators too. I can't forget them, because we're kind of rolling with the punches in terms of rolling out different schedules and trying to support teachers. But again, you know, all my hats off to the teachers, because without them, this wouldn't be possible. Flat out would not be possible. And to the kids have done an incredible job. Even like these little kindergartners, you know, like they're doing such a great job of, if they're in person, they're paying attention. If they're at home, they're really trying to sign on and pay attention. And you know, hats off again to the kids, to the teachers, and to the parents, and just everyone involved. It really is a total community effort, but I can definitely understand the frustrations of everyone involved, you know, because parents and a lot of people want their kids back in school, and some teachers want kids back in school, and there's some teachers and administrators that are still very concerned about this disease and the pandemic, and you know, you have to compromise, and that's what it comes down to, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of funny too, because nowadays, like, you remember when I was a kid and people were like, oh, I hate going to school, and now kids are like, I want to go to school, I want to go to school.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you realize what you miss, you know, when something's taken from you, you realize like, man, this really sucks. Like, I really like being with my friends, you know? So.
And any like last parting advice or words of wisdom you would give to anyone watching or listening?
Any last, a couple things. One, if you want to be an educator and you have a passion for working with kids, do it, because there's nothing more gratifying than being a teacher and being an educator, and, you know, making connections with kids that grow up, you being one of them. You know, it's always cool to see kids that are doing well as they grow up and become adults. And then there's one quote by Martin Luther King Jr., and it's the time is right to do what's right. I'm paraphrasing. So time is right to do what is right. Always do the right thing, always try and help people. And then the other piece is, and this is like a big one of my motto over at Rockaway Meadow, it's Stan Lee has an awesome quote about being a hero and being a superhero. And look it up, because I can't remember it off the top of my head word for word, but it's basically like, anyone who does the right thing to help others is without a doubt a superhero, you know. And it all comes down to serving your community and helping other people, and that's what, you know, police officers do, that's what educators do, you know. Help your community, help your kids, and if that's part of you, then you can be an effective educator.
Oh, my heart. Good old Stan Lee too, rest in peace.
Yeah, he's awesome. Stan Lee's awesome.
Yeah. And then just to final thing, like a rapid fire kind of question, is there any like top moments that you think of in your education career so far? Like kids that went on and really impressed you, or just memorable moment you had in the classroom, or a project you made up, just anything that really stands out to you.
Oh, let's see here.
A fun
Okay.
little story.
Yeah, obviously, like the kid piece is always fun. What's really funny, last year I see this kid picking up his son at Lake Hiawatha, and I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm like, Steven Suffin. And it was one of my former students picking up his son who was in my daughter's class.
Oh, how
So that's
funny.
that's always awesome when you see that, and it's like he's such a good dad, such a hands-on dad, and his son is the sweetest little kid. So that
Oh,
was one of my former students is a very successful police officer in Baltimore City.
oh,
Uh,
nice.
Invited us to his wedding, Susie and Hassan. He invited us to
Oh,
his wedding when my little guy was a newborn baby, so we got to see him get married. So that was awesome.
oh,
One of my other former wrestlers is the Pizzuta family. You know the
yeah, yeah.
Pizzuta
Nick was in
family?
my grade, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Anthony was in Jessica's grade.
So Nick is a police officer now in Mount Arlington, and
Oh,
he's
is he? I don't even know
yeah,
he was in my grade.
yeah. So Nick and I, we still stay in touch.
Cool.
He's a
He
great
was a good
kid.
wrestler.
Yeah, he was. He was tough. Great kid. And his mother actually watched my son his first year when my wife went back to work. Mrs. Pizzuta was here 3 days a week watching Dominic. So that was fun.
Um, I
Yeah.
have a funny story about the Pizzutas. I love Maria, right?
Maria. Yeah. Yep.
I have to give ode to her because she took me, Nick, and I don't know if you know who Alec Grinvall,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
did the Tough Mudder together. And
Get out of here.
yeah, and
Oh, that's
it
awesome.
was funny because it was like Nick was the wrestler, Alec was the hockey player, and I was just this freaking girl who was like, I want to do Tough Mudder, like I'm gonna do it.
And you did it, right?
And it's funny, and at one point, like Alec got a little hurt at one point, so then he told us like, just go without me, just keep going. And then me and Nick were at the Wounded Warrior obstacle, so he had to carry me on his back, I had to carry him on my back, and it's just a fun. And his mom was the one that took us to, and we did it in Pennsylvania. So I always
That's awesome.
like, we did the Tough Mudder together.
Yeah, yeah, he's a great kid. And then just seeing some of my former students become educators is always really sweet to see too.
Yeah.
So it's always nice when they come back and they want to give back to the community. And we do a pretty good job of if kids went through the system, we give them an opportunity to interview. And in some cases, they're those final candidates that come back to the district. In some cases, they end up going to another district, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Anthony was one of those kids, Pizzuta. He had an opportunity to come teach here, and
Oh, okay.
he ended up choosing Fairlawn instead. But
Ah,
um,
he stood
yeah,
against Parsippany.
yeah, and you know what? He's doing a great job over there. And it's
I
it's
think he so when Nick, when we were in high school and did wrestling, he I want to say his brother Anthony was like kind of like not assistant. I don't know if he was for sure on the payroll to be assistant, but he would be at all the
yeah, he's doing the volunteer piece. Yep,
yeah,
he's doing that.
because it was
So
like
it's
McMickle was the
yep,
uh, uh
PO.
McMickle, and then there was another assistant at a time, and I always forget his name.
It was probably Mr. Ricker, Mr. Flammer, because Mr. Ricker was definitely there as an assistant for at least a year as when you were in high school. I want to. Oh no,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Hold on.
There
You
was,
might.
I don't remember those two names, but if you said the name, I would remember it because he was a pretty cool dude. Like I remember we would like shoot the shit and like, because he wasn't as serious of a coach as like McMickle and PO. But what
Okay.
was his name? I can't think of the name, but there was a third, and I remember.
Um,
And then Anthony would
oh,
come
Mr.
around.
Dasty. Remember Mr.
Well, I
Dasty?
remember Mr. Dasty too, but there was so there was a fourth. Mr. Dasty scared me. I remember like I did not think he liked me. I talked a lot and it would annoy him. And I remember one time we had to go to a match and it was me and the other stat girl. And normally like we would drive because we had our license, but at a certain time, but I remember this one match we like couldn't drive, and we're like, oh, McMickle, we'll come with you, and then no, you gotta go with Dassy, and I'm like, oh no, we're gonna be in his car, and it was so awkward because he didn't think he liked you, but he was actually really cool. So
Yeah, he's a funny guy, like
really
a
dry
quiet.
sarcasm too.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah,
Um,
super
yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. So, there is a lot of great stories about education. It's just, it's a very
Yeah.
rewarding profession. And, you always want to see your former students doing well. And I think the school district does a really good job of preparing kids for that. Like look at you. There's some kids they're doing a lot of great stuff out there, whether they're engineers or whether they're, doing, they're writing screenplays like Mr. Schaefer's brother. That's what he does. And he went to the
Oh,
Hills.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
he's a screenwriter. So
Wow.
it's just, yeah, it's really cool things taking place.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, great
That's
stuff.
awesome. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time. I mean, I obviously know you have, your family life right now, so I really appreciate you taking the time to like come and
Anytime.
talk. And this was so rad.
It was great. It was great. I had a great time, a rad time. Uh,
Yeah.
and I wish you the very best in the future. Keep up the great work and good
Thanks.
luck.
Likewise. Likewise to you too. And here's to the new principal.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you
All
guys.
right. You got it. Take care, Brandy.
You too.